Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.
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 Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast with me, Dr. Janine Anderson. Heads up, this show may contain adult language and may mention specific foods. If you find either of those to be too triggering, I trust you to take care of yourself and do what you need to do. This podcast is sponsored by ED Care. ED Care has provided PHP, IOP, and outpatient treatment for all genders 18 and over since 2001. CAMSA, which stands for Connection, Acceptance, Mindfulness, Sense of Self, and Action, is ED Care's mindfulness-based treatment approach and is incorporated into each individualized treatment plan. Facilities are located in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Kansas City, and all treatment is supported by master's level clinicians or higher. ED Care offers 4 specialty tracks for binge eating disorder, elite athletes, substance use, and trauma. And the Connections House, an affordable supportive housing component, adds an extra layer of supervised support. Visit eatingdisorder.care or call 866-771-0861. Hi, everyone. Oh my gosh, we're back for season 5 of the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast. Isn't that unreal? I feel like it's gone by so quickly, and yet it hasn't. So I want to thank you for your ongoing support, and especially being supportive and patient while I take a few months off every summer and kind of in that winter season again in between seasons. That really helps me out. As you all know, I produce far fewer episodes than other podcasts, and I'm totally okay with that. So I appreciate that you all hang in there with me as I take my time trying to do the best episodes that I can. And I wanted to just hop on here and honestly say hello before we get into the good stuff in this episode with Dr. Jen Gaudiani, who is freaking amazing, as we all know. And I wanted to say that if you have been enjoying the podcast and or if you're new to it and you like it, it always helps me if you rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, which used to be iTunes. So keep that in mind. That's one way that you can help the show out. Additionally, if you ever feel comfortable telling other people about the show, that really helps me too, so it can find new people. And lastly, I just wanted to let you know I've been working extra hard on bringing it with the guests this season, and I can't tell you right now, so this is a total teaser, but the season finale episode is with somebody who is a big deal, who I'm totally unabashedly gonna geek out over when this person comes on. It's gonna be so cool. So stay tuned for all of that. We've got 10 more episodes this season as usual. So thanks for your support. Let's get into it. Jennifer L. Gaudiani, MD, CEDS, FAED, is the founder and medical director of the Gaudiani Clinic. Board certified in internal medicine, she completed her undergraduate degree at Harvard, medical school at Boston University School of Medicine, and her internal medicine residency and chief residency at Yale. From 2008 to 2016, she was one of the leaders of the Acute Center for Eating Disorders at Denver Health. She left after serving as its medical director to found the Gaudiani Clinic, which provides superb in-person and nationwide telemedicine outpatient medical care to patients of all genders with eating disorders and disordered eating, and to those in recovery. The Gaudiani Clinic is a HAES-informed provider and embraces treating people of all shapes and sizes. Through a collaborative, communicative, and multidisciplinary approach, the clinic cares for the whole person in the context of their values. She has lectured nationally and internationally, is widely published in scientific literature as well as on blogs, and is a current member of the editorial board of the International Journal of Eating Disorders and the Academy for Eating Disorders Medical Care Standards Committee, and is a former board member of IADEP. Dr. Gaudiani is one of a very small number of internal medicine physicians who is certified as an eating disorders expert. She is also a fellow of the Academy for Eating Disorders. Dr. Gaudiani's first book, Sick Enough, A Guide to the Medical Complications of Eating Disorders, will be released by Routledge on October 2nd, 2018, and will be available on Amazon. To find out more about Dr. G, you can visit www.gaudianiclinic.com. All of this is linked in the show notes. Help me welcome Dr. Gaudiani. Dr. Gaudiani, welcome back to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast. We're excited to have you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Janine.
Tell everybody why you're here today.
I'm really excited. I am here to talk about my new book, which is called Sick Enough, A Guide to the Medical Complications of Eating Disorders.
We are thrilled. I will just go ahead and say that I was lucky enough to read the manuscript of it, and I will be recommending it to all of my clients and all of their families because it is an excellent book that I think everybody, regardless of whatever type of eating disorder related struggles you're dealing with, can benefit from reading. And it's not only very well researched and thorough and smart, of course, because you wrote it, but it's very accessible and easy to understand. And I feel like that is a very difficult thing to do. So kudos to you on that.
Janine, thank you. That means the world to me. I so appreciate that.
When there's good material out there, but it can be a little bit difficult to understand and to really take something meaningful away from. And your book is not only easy to understand in terms of explaining the medicine behind the concepts you're talking about, but also I think it's just so clear to see what kind of a doctor you are. And in reading it, readers will be able to experience how warm and caring you are. And I think that really just helps all the info to sink in so much better about what goes on in your body if you're dealing with an eating disorder.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Sick Enough.
Well, the story begins last summer when I had the perfect planetary alignment, apparently, because I went and spoke at the Female Athlete Conference in Boston, and I watched Wonder Woman twice in a week. I was fired up. All my feminist antennae were just twinkling, and I felt like there was this wonderful push for voice and empowerment, and I thought, I have a book to write. I thought I've been so privileged to be in this field for a decade, and I've talked to so many patients at the bedside or in my clinic about what uniquely happens to their bodies when they don't get enough nourishment in, or when they purge, when they have binge eating disorder. And I had really absorbed in the last few years so many of the vital social justice messages about weight inclusivity that I thought, I need to write what I know in the way that I share it with my patients so that more people than those I interact with one-on-one can benefit.
Yeah, the field needs this book. So I'm so thankful that you wrote it. It's not easy to write a book. So
No.
Yes, I do. I was relating to you on the gratitude and also the just feeling inspired. And I'm so glad that you acted on it. So tell us a little bit about what Sick Enough is about.
So Sick Enough is a detailed case-based, imaginary case-based book that goes through 5 key topics related to the medical complications of eating disorders and disordered eating. And I wrote it for patients themselves as well as their families so that their families could both have more compassion and understanding of what goes on, as well as be better informed advocates within mental health and medical health systems. And I wrote it for professionals who, even if they don't know a lot about eating disorders, have curiosity and desire to take care of this patient population better, so that patients can bring a book to their pediatrician or to their primary care doctor or their GI doctor and say, look, you were saying you'd like to understand more about me. You can read this. And the 5 parts are: part 1, not enough calories; part 2, purging; part 3, binge eating disorder and size stigma; part 4, unmeasurable medical problems; and part 5, specific populations like males, athletes, substance use disorder, individuals who are older, and also patients who decline needed treatment and how to manage that whole spectrum of refusal of care.
Yeah, we could go all day talking about this, I'm sure. I'm wondering if there's a particular topic within those 5 that you introduced that you want to talk a little bit more in depth about.
Oh my gosh, I'm so passionate about all of these topics. I think what I'd like to say, broadly speaking, is that my goal with this book was to help every individual with an eating disorder or disordered eating understand that whether they have one of the medical problems I describe, or 10, or none, just having an eating disorder and disordered eating makes them sick enough to change what they're doing and to seek recovery. Mm-hmm. So, one of my major themes in this book is to try to help individuals understand, and then hopefully society at large to understand, that it is the minority of patients with eating disorders who are underweight. Unlike the stigma and stereotype that people have of someone with an eating disorder, which perpetuate the invisibilization of those in so-called typical body sizes or larger body sizes, the fact is that the majority of people with eating disorders are not underweight. Mm-hmm. And their bodies have so much to do with the symptoms from their eating disorder, as well as their recovery process. So I think the message of the book as a whole is to try to center marginalized populations to a certain extent, and to bring to people's attention what really happens to bodies of all shapes and sizes when we engage in disordered eating. And that could mean a diet, it could mean a so-called cleanse, or it could mean orthorexia, sort of quote unquote clean eating, or a full-fledged eating disorder.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you this a little later, but I feel like maybe we could start with it, which is, why do you think people who have eating disorders never think that they're sick enough?
It's one of the most painful and I think little talked about aspects of the mental illness of eating disorders. I'm not sure I've ever met a patient who hadn't had a thought at some point, I'm not sick enough. I've seen someone on the internet who looks different from me. I have been to my doctor, and my doctor seems to imply that I was fine. I keep getting praised out in public for what my body looks like, or conversely, tormented in public and told my body should look different. It seems to be hand in hand in the minds of these beautiful people who have eating disorders. This was true when I was in my hospital unit and I was taking care of the most medically compromised adults in the country with anorexia nervosa. And it's true in my office practice. So many patients say, Dr. G, should I even be here? Am I even sick enough to see you? And I say, oh my gosh, yes. Every person is unique in how their personal body manifests medically the result of their eating disorder. But everyone with an eating disorder is sick enough to get help. And so I guess I've heard that phrase so many times that I decided to title my book that. And it's been really satisfying because as I've told my patients, hey, I've written a book, they hear the title and they go, I know exactly what you mean. And people without eating disorders say, what does that title mean? So I know that you've heard this as well, Janine, in your practice, how prevalent this part of the mental illness is.
Yeah, I was just relating and thinking about how, I don't know if I've ever worked with somebody who felt like all of their struggles were valid enough to seek help. I feel like I just hear that so much. So-and-so has it worse. I saw this thing in a documentary, all these different reasons why people don't feel like their struggle is credible enough. And I'm so glad that you're here to talk about this and wrote a whole book about how, regardless of what's going on with your eating disorder, you should absolutely seek treatment and are worthy of that.
That's right. And it's important that I not take the perspective that not feeling sick enough centers within the individual. Yes, it's a mental illness, but the problem with not feeling sick enough centers in the toxic society that surrounds us. It centers in really harmful Western medical systems of care, of which I am a member and struggle to sort of recognize that and try to counteract that where I can, where society, doctors, other healthcare providers, insurance companies, families of origin often either wittingly or unwittingly give patients the message, you're not that bad. There's a lot of origins of that, among them that doctors are anxious, type A, harm-avoidant people. And when you see someone with an eating disorder who's clearly suffering, and yet the doctor may feel helpless due to lack of training, lack of time, lack of, interest to sort of help that person, they may end up taking themselves off the hook by saying, you're not that bad. It's not deadly. You'll be okay. It's just irritable bowel syndrome. Your potassium isn't that severe. And of course, they're trying to make themselves feel better because they can't help someone suffering. But what it does is causes this cycle of invalidation and shame and invisibilization of the patient, who then doesn't feel that they're worthy to make changes.
Yeah, kind of going back to the point you brought up about this being existing within a toxic culture. If we dive into one of the topic areas of your book regarding not having enough calories, you write about not having enough calories and restricting, and you introduce this idea, this theme of the perfect child. Tell us about that.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved in writing this book, because I was an English major in college and particularly focused on poetry, is that both in my clinical work and in my book, I use a lot of metaphors. And I find that when someone is feeling rigid or resistant to what we're talking about, if I can share with them a story of sort of a little fairy tale or a brief narrative, sometimes that connects with them more than just speaking classic medicalese. And so this chapter has a little metaphor or story at the end of it that I use with patients that seems to have helped. And the story of the quote-unquote perfect child is one that I want to preface by saying has nothing to do with family blaming. Not at all. That has been long debunked. I have no interest in blaming families for eating disorders or the challenges that emerge from them. So it's really important before I say that story to make that very clear. The story of the quote-unquote perfect child is something that I've learned from speaking with multiple patients over the years as they tell me their unique narrative of how mind-body connection and the failure of Western medical systems led them down a pathway that ended up unexpectedly in an eating disorder. And the story basically goes, there once was a child, and throughout the book I actually use the singular they in order to acknowledge that gender does not come in binary form. But in this particular story, I'm going to just happen to choose, this is a story of a little girl. So there once was a little girl who, as of age 3, perhaps, was already aware that she knew things about people's emotions that others didn't. She could walk into a room and know how people in the room were feeling and really take the emotional temperature of the room. And she was so sensitive, so sensitive. The world affected her more deeply than any of her peers. And so she's really an extraordinary little human, but that's a lot to take in for a little person. And she might have been just so sensitive that she gets the message from the rest of the world, be fine. That is, if she cries over the plight of sea turtles, a well-meaning parent or teacher or sibling might say, save your tears. You can't do anything about this. Why are you getting so upset about it? And because she was so sensitive, people might have given her the message, hey, easy. They're trying to help her, but instead what she hears is, be fine, be perfect. And she's really capable. So she puts on a brave face and she kind of gulps it down and she tries to be the perfect child. She's a rule follower. She is an authority respecter. Coaches and teachers love her. She gives nobody any problems. All the while, she's been absorbing these inputs from the world. And because she's supposed to be fine, it doesn't even occur to her that she needs to develop systems for how to manage that kind of input. She just keeps absorbing it. And this builds up and builds up until, say, adolescence, when there are hormonal changes, body changes in a world where change often is not welcome, and social complexities start to grow. And at this point, her little soul, which has been absorbing so much from the world, starts to get overwhelmed. And because she's never developed a language for how to talk about this, because of course she's supposed to be fine, that soul kind of gets into her digestive system. Or if she's ever had an injury in sports, it finds tissues that have been disrupted in some way and exacerbates that pain. So now she might be having stomach aches every day, or at least on the days before she has tests. And stomach aches are medical. And that's something that is physical. And so she tells her family about that. And they say, oh, let's take you to the pediatrician. The pediatrician sees her and evaluates her and does some blood work. And of course, what does the pediatrician say? You're fine. And she goes, oh my gosh. I mean, I guess I knew I was supposed to be fine emotionally before, but I've got physical symptoms now and they're still telling me I'm fine. What in the world? And so that may progress. And she may start to have her tummy ache after she eats, for instance. And in this modern era, when Western medicine has sort of done a quick medical workup and said, you're fine, unfortunately now parents are pushed in the direction of finding dietitians who aren't eating disorder dietitians. Or, and while there are good naturopaths and good Western doctors and bad ones of each, she might go to alternative medicine, which often says, I know what you need to do. You should avoid gluten, sugar, soy, and dairy. Probably you're having food allergies. And so what does our perfect little rule follower do? She follows those rules. And there's something in her soul that understands that a need is at least sort of being acknowledged and met. And so that change, that validation of physical experience feels enough like self-care that her tummy feels a bit better. And she goes, oh my gosh, I did have food intolerances. I've got to avoid these foods forever. And because she's such a good rule follower, no one can follow that kind of a meal plan without losing weight. So she starts to lose weight. And of course, in our toxic, miserable society, anyone losing weight makes everyone go, you look great. Mm-hmm. She's really external validation sensitive. And she says, oh, well, I didn't even know there was a problem before, but apparently what I'm doing is better. I don't feel that great. My energy's not so hot, but I guess I should keep doing what I'm doing. And at some point, there's just enough malnutrition that's affected her brain that she starts to get more rigid. The rules become absolute. The weight loss becomes worse, or not. Not everybody's going to lose weight, but they're going to have experience of malnutrition. Then they start to get GI symptoms from slowed metabolism, and the cycle perpetuates. And suddenly someone is starting to think fearful thoughts about their body and food as opposed to their prior experience. And that numbness that comes from restriction may also satisfy those sensitive radar by sort of icing them down. And suddenly an eating disorder is born. And I try to use, I've heard that story in some variation so many times from my patients, which is a testament to the failure of Western medicine, to how fast doctors are required to see patients, to that inability to say, wait a second, what's going on in your soul? Because your soul can show up in your belly. That a lot of patients sort of feel validated by hearing, yes, that is how it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess I want to pause and speak briefly directly to my listeners, which is, hey, did y'all just hear that medical doctor talking about your soul and this really deep emotional experience and how it's all connected? Isn't that awesome? I just love how you wrap it all in together because that's how it actually is. And I just know so many people who are listening to this are relating deeply with maybe not even intentionally starting with a diet. I've tried to be better about speaking to that lately too, that not everybody's eating disorder starts off with a diet specifically for the purpose of weight loss. They can start in all different kinds of ways. And this example is a really good one for that. In your book, you also talk about patients in larger bodies. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that in your experience you've seen with patients in larger bodies and how medical complications can manifest for them in their bodies, but also in their interaction with the medical system.
This is something, Janine, that I continue to be on a steep learning curve of. And I am so grateful to some of the teachers who have generously given me their time and wisdom. People like Deb Burghard and Carmen Kuhl, Hillary Canavy, Desiree Attaway. These are people who have radically changed the way I understand patients in larger bodies and the entire medical institution that's going on in the United States that is so deeply harmful and oppressive to individuals in larger bodies. So the story here for me is that I'm one of those people who used to cause harm. I was brought up in the Western medical tradition of calories in, calories out, weight loss is a matter of willpower, and I just squirm to even say those words now, but it's so important for me as I sit in so many markers of privilege, of white, of thin-bodied, cis, hetero, married, educated, able-bodied, that I say with enormous humility, I did wrong for a lot of years. I did wrong kindly, but it doesn't matter how nicely I said harmful words. And what I've really come to understand in the last couple of years is that there is a totally new way that physicians need to understand patients in larger bodies, whether or not they have binge eating disorder, because of course one is not synonymous. And we need to do a totally different medical management. I believe that the number one medical complication of binge eating disorder is the subpar medical care that doctors give to people in larger bodies. And I've come to understand this through my learning about health at every size and weight-inclusive care. Patients in larger bodies may go to the doctor reluctantly because they already know what's going to happen and find furniture that's inappropriate for their body, a gown that doesn't fit, a blood pressure cuff that doesn't fit, a body mass index chart right in front of their eyes, glaringly telling them they're in the red zone. It makes them feel their body is a problem to be solved. And that is not scientifically accurate. So because I take care of patients in larger bodies and patients with binge eating disorder in my clinic and love taking care of them, I have learned a couple of really vitally important things. One, as I did research for the book, I learned how rampant it is for physicians to bring their internalized size stigma dangerously to the patient by equating thinness and health. And the fact is that study after study, big studies, tens of thousands of people have shown that it's cardiovascular fitness, not body size, that predicts mortality. That can't be emphasized enough. And so, yes, while people at the very highest quintile and very lowest quintile of weight tend to be less medically healthy, it is cardiovascular fitness that determines overall mortality. Now, not everyone is interested in health the way that we sort of define it as a society, and I respect that. But because I'm a medical doctor, I'll speak to the sort of quintessential health aspects of this. The way that I have put this into play in my practice is one, I literally never weigh any patient in whom I'm not medically monitoring nutritional rehabilitation and weight gain from anorexia. I will not check a weight because it is not a vital sign that matters, nor is BMI. And I tell patients that the second I see them. In fact, I let them know that before they even see me, because the act of weighing someone in a larger body is a trauma.
Yeah, it means something different to them.
Yes. And they have had so many shaming, isolating experiences with being weighed before. So we don't even go there because I don't care about their weight. What I care about is their behavior.
Yes.
And what's been so satisfying is, while Health at Every Size, or HAES, has been proven as a beautiful, successful mechanism or philosophy for therapeutic settings as well as dietitian settings, there are so few doctors that embrace it that I don't know that we have any real data necessarily about, does it work medically? And I'm just exhilarated to be able to say it does. Mm-hmm. Patients who, in the course of either binge eating disorder or very understandably misled online attempts to recover through, being mandated to eat an enormous number of calories every single day, well beyond that, joy, well beyond satisfaction. I've got a number of patients who come to my clinic. They are now on 100 to 300 units of insulin a day. They've got significant type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, steatohepatitis or fatty liver. And I say, we're not going to focus on weight ever. And sometimes patients won't join my clinic when they find out.
Right.
Foster weight loss or promise it or discuss it. And I'll say, I hold space for why you would want to lose weight, not because there's anything wrong with your body, but because you are embedded in a toxic society that routinely points out a perceived inadequacy. But this is a safe space to be in your unique body here, and we're not going to look at weight loss. What we're going to do is make sure you have a therapist and a dietitian who are HAES-informed, and when you're in this clinic space, your body will be safe. And I will help remind you that the only way forward is to never diet again, to nourish yourself with satisfying, balanced foods, restricting nothing, and giving your body what it needs throughout the day, not waiting till the end of the day to eat. And then to move for joy within your ability and your interest level. And that those two tasks are going to radically improve your medical health. And indeed, within 6 months, I have people who are on 300 units of insulin who are now completely off insulin. And their sleep is better. And people who could only walk 10 steps within their homes, panting, exhausted, lightheaded, with their heart pounding and their back hurting, are now going sledding with their kids. They're hiking again. They're horseback riding. They're volunteering at their kids' schools. They're walking across a parking lot to a school play instead of being in their wheelchair. Mm-hmm. It is one of the most exciting things imaginable. And of course, when I tell doctors this, the first thing they ask was, wow, how much weight did they lose?
It's just awful to hear that part. I mean, it's sadly not surprising, but awful. Another thing that I'm thinking about is if you'd be willing to say a little bit about atypical anorexia, a term which I abhor, but it is the term, just to recognize folks who are out there in larger bodies, but who their primary concern is restricting and not having enough calories.
Absolutely. So the DSM-5 immortalizes its size stigma by establishing a diagnosis called atypical anorexia nervosa. Anorexia nervosa, we pretty much have a good handle on. People are fearful of food, they're fearful of weight gain, and they're medically underweight. Atypical anorexia is defined in the DSM-5, where patients have all of the symptoms and behaviors and anguish of anorexia nervosa, but they don't happen to be underweight. And of course, no one will be surprised to hear that atypical anorexia is far more prevalent than anorexia nervosa.
It's weird how people don't feel sick enough sometimes.
Isn't it? Well, one of those reasons is that when they go to the doctor prescribes those very behaviors or praises them for those behaviors and the weight loss that may or may not ensue. So it is a torment. It is absolutely inappropriate medical care to focus on weight and to ever recommend eating disorder behaviors or even diets to patients, regardless of their body size. So it's very important to know that atypical anorexia carries double the death rate. That is a 200% increase in death compared with non-eating disordered peers. And that studies are increasingly showing that when individuals engage in anorexia behaviors and lose weight, the change in their body weight causes all of the same medical complications as those who are underweight with anorexia nervosa. The slow heart rate, the freezing limbs, the low energy, the crummy sleep, the anxiety, the end organ failure, the slowed digestion, the hair loss. All of these occur in those with atypical anorexia as well. And an important study has relatively recently been released that showed that weight loss, even outside of quote-unquote medical underweight, is very significant and medically problematic.
Wow, just more reason to drive home the point that the whole field and the medical field, our eating disorder field, everybody needs to take the focus off of weight and really refocus on what the client or the patient thinks of in terms of what they want for their health, or even if they want to use that word, because I feel like the word health is getting pretty corrupted and stigmatizing too. I wanted to also ask, because you wrote this whole beautiful book about the complications, medical complications from eating disorders, if there are some medical complications that people don't often think of. I think the thing that you pointed out just now about atypical anorexia being also very dangerous is probably something that most people don't think of. What are some other examples, some medical complications?
Yeah, there are so many. Some of them are symptoms of malnutrition and not dangerous in and of themselves, and some of them are truly life-threatening. So I'll give you an example. A symptom might be that many people's hands and feet get cold in the context of restriction. And this might be somebody who has a family history of Raynaud's or vasospastic changes in their hands and feet. But for the most part, when someone isn't getting in enough nutrition, they start to feel chilly. And if they run their hand down their arm, as I do when I examine patients and then I have them perform the same act themselves as a piece of biofeedback, their arm will be warm, going from shoulder to wrist, warm, 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 cool. And by the time you get to the hand, they're really quite chilly. Same with legs and feet. Now, often patients haven't even paid attention to this, but that is a sign of metabolic slowing, as your brilliant cave person brain, which for those who haven't heard me speak before, refers to the part of your brain that runs you as a mammal. It refers to the cave person brain recognizing famine for its mammal and trying to save the mammal's life. And one of the ways is because so many of our calories that we consume go towards keeping human beings at a steady 98.6 degree body temperature. It thinks to itself, whoa, we're in a famine. I need to spare calories for my mammal, we better make sure that we cool this body down a little and not spend so many of our precious calories on this. So one of the ways it cools us down is by literally decreasing blood flow to our hands and feet. It's as if those are spare rooms in a house we're heating for the winter, and we turn off the vent so that we don't spend as much needlessly, because hands and feet, they're not necessary for life as far as the cave person brain is concerned. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing is that people feel chillier and seek out hot cups of tea and warm sweaters, even on relatively warm days, because the body doesn't want to be responsible for keeping them warm itself. It makes them chilly to seek out external warmth. So that's an example, and people are like, whoa, I never thought of that before.
Right.
An example of something that's really dangerous would be low blood sugar. And it is my observation now, after a decade in the field, that low blood sugar is probably the top cause of death, at least in anorexia nervosa, maybe contributes as well in patients with atypical anorexia nervosa. It's not that the heart just slows down to zero. It's that when it runs out of energy, it can't keep beating. And this is something that's not focused on enough in medical settings. Many people don't even have symptoms of low blood sugar, but it is a potential killer.
What are some symptoms of low blood sugar in case somebody out there is concerned about that for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. People might feel foggy-headed, sweaty, hot, confused, or shaky. I would say those are the commonest symptoms of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar.
Thanks for going over those. It's so tricky too, because if we're talking about this in context, I could absolutely see a lot of the clients that I work with where I think a lot of people would say that maybe some of those symptoms or experiencing low blood sugar like that is just to be expected if you're on a diet. I can't even tell you how many people I've heard tell me different things that they've powered through. And honestly, many years ago, things that I would try to power through as well, and how scary that is. And just to kind of point out that I wish we were all more aware and could recognize how dangerous and harmful those things are, rather than thinking of things through toxic diet culture lens where it's all a matter of willpower and who cares if you're a little chilly.
That's so beautifully said. It's really one of the main reasons I wrote this book, because patients with eating disorders, of course, can come and see me. I love seeing patients, and my clinic sees patients from around the country. But for those who can't get to me, but who deserve to know what's happening in their bodies in a way that is accessible and social justice informed, I want this book to be out there for people around the world and for their families and for their doctors, because right now, those who use Dr. Google are going to end up coming up with pseudoscience and, 5 foods never to eat. They deserve to have a resource that speaks to the science as well as the heart that are so necessary to do this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very thankful that you wrote the book. And honestly, I know I'm giving it a lot of praise here, but it's really absolutely a book that everybody who is dealing with any ED related stuff and their loved ones should read. I feel like it's going to be one of those fundamental books. I feel like there's a handful of books that everyone going through recovery should read at some point, and this is one that I would definitely recommend. So I'm so excited to have that out there and cannot endorse it highly enough. Like, I very, very, very strongly recommend that you get it. One of the things that I usually wrap up interviews with is asking guests, what gives you hope for people who are trying to recover right now?
I love ending on a high note. I feel hope and excitement every day that I come to work, because people who are suffering show up in their authentic selves and they find new ways of being able to take baby steps forward in their recovery journey. Everyone's journey is so unique, but as patients start to see their bodies giving them feedback about how much better they feel nourished. One of my patients, for instance, at age 37, just had her first normal, natural period in her life. She'd never gotten one as a teenager. She was on the pill for 15 years. She's 37, and now she's getting monthly periods. She also said that when she was malnourished, she couldn't concentrate and would get so freaked out and anxious about doing certain aspects of her job. She would think about it for 10 days ahead and stay awake all night and then question herself and her worthiness afterwards. And she just said to me the other day, Dr. G, I realized I just did 2 of those tasks, like in the 5 minutes that I was walking my dog. And I just didn't really care about how they turned out afterwards. I mean, they were good. I questioned myself. She's like, this whole nourished brain thing, wow, it really makes a difference.
It's pretty great. Yeah.
Patients who have, had restriction and binging or, any other type of eating disorder, that as they routinely nourish their body and soul, so many aspects of how they live in their body and their ability to live their values continue to improve.
Yes, which is so much easier to do, feels so much better, and is so much more fulfilling when you are working with a team that is not focused on your weight, because none of those things really have to have the focus on the weight ever. And I love that you spoke to how people really do get better. I say this all the time, but people do recover. People are recovering every single day. So I always want for people to hear that when they tune in and listen to the podcast, that yes, things can be very scary and very hard and exhausting, and people get better all the time. And there are a lot of professionals like Dr. G and myself, hopefully, who are working very hard to do better for you all as well.
Absolutely. I continue to learn every single day, and I make mistakes, and then I try to get better.
Yep. That's all we can do. Any final things that we haven't gotten a chance to mention? I, of course, am going to link all of your info in the show notes so people can click there. If people want to connect with you more, where should they go to find you?
Thank you. They can go to the clinic's website, www.gaudianiclinic.com, which is GAUDIANI clinic.com. Or if they want to check out the book, they can find it on Amazon, or they can go to the book's website, www.sickenough.com.
Great. And the book will be out October 2nd of 2018. Available on Amazon. Great. Dr. G, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. You're our most beloved doctor. I want to give a shout out to your book. Again, my strongest recommendation to go out and read that, and also to reinforce my recommendation that if people are looking for outpatient medical care, they can contact you at your clinic. You actually have a new doctor, so your staff is expanding, and they can find all of that info in the show's notes.
That's amazing. And Janine, thank you for all you do with patients and all you do with this podcast. You're a really bright light.
It's my honor. All right. Thanks, Dr. G. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Let's keep in touch. You can find all the information you need about the podcast at eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com, including full podcast episodes and links to all of our social media sites. You can join our Facebook group for the podcast by searching Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast on Facebook. This is a closed group for listeners of the podcast looking to connect, share resources, and get involved in a pro-recovery community. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing. Talk to you next time on the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.